It's a great pleasure to be here today. And as John said, I've had a life of stories. I'm not actually going to give a presentation about storytelling, but there's a common theme in amongst all of these things. How many of you, quick show of hands, got enthused by some of the America's Cup racing that was going on over the last couple of months? And we're about, in 1 week's time, to see another incredible race, the Vendée Globe, start and set off around the world. 40 teams, no less. 22 of those teams, would you believe, will be carrying scientific devices on those boats to help in their part to make some measurements as they race around the world. But I wanted to spend this afternoon really delving into a little bit of the America's Cup, because whilst it's not my traditional area, I'm more of an ocean sailing guy, and increasingly over the last probably 8 years got very involved in historical journeys as well. A quick show of hands, any of you seen the little wooden boat that's parked outside Knock? Well, that is the replica of Captain Bligh's launch. She was famously cast adrift, or he was cast adrift with 18 crew members. And we recreated that voyage, or 9 of us recreated that voyage from Tonga all the way to Timor, a distance of 4,000 miles, to primarily see if we could endure the same ordeal as Captain Bligh and his crew, but also it was a chance to really delve into that story and to see the James Cook alongside. Of course, Bligh was a sailing master on many of Cook's voyages. He was an incredible cartographer, hydrographer, arguably one of the greatest navigators we've ever seen. And that little boat that's parked up outside Knock is going through a little bit of a transformation, because we're about to tell another story, which come and grab me during the quieter times, and I'll tell you a little bit about that story. But just as a little hint of that, before I get wrapped into the America's Cup and the world of design and data and building, incredible machines driven by pilots or flown by pilots with cyclors providing the power, I do want to share just a little bit of what life was like 200 years ago. And obviously surveying was a critical part. This picture is actually done by the artist, a young artist called Conrad Humphreys, and we believe the little boat in the foreground is a cutter called the Hope. She was one of the survey boats, and when you look at the James Cook, when you look at some of the equipment that you're producing and manufacturing, of course 200 years ago they would have been instruments on these little survey boats, and they would have painstakingly gone out and measured and collected data, primarily to produce very accurate charts and maps that would help ships to navigate around the world. But increasingly from there, they went on and produced climate data and ocean science data. And then, of course, fast track to next week. It'll be my 20th anniversary from doing the Vendée Globe with as a younger guy, 36 years old, to see 40 of these teams taking part in a marathon around the world, 22 of them carrying these scientific data equipment. Some of them will be deploying Argo floats, others have got equipment to monitor salinity and ocean temperatures and various other things as well. So how the world of sport is contributing to that citizen science, that opportunity for storytelling, because this race will consume column inches for the next 3 months. Would you believe that these boats now fly across the ocean, and the first boat will be back in around 60 days around the world? So bearing in mind 20 years ago, it took me 104 days. I think I'd prefer to have some wings on the bottom of my boat so I could fly as well. So I guess, but as a way of sort of quick introduction, I grew up in Exmouth. I started sailing on the River Exe. Um, I was lucky enough that I had some great colleagues at school, and John was one of those at primary school, would you believe? So I think he is arguably my oldest and longest school friend. We both had a passion for rugby. Eventually, I wasn't getting any bigger, as you can see, and so I focused on my sailing, where I was just starting to get some success. And sailing is a sport that relies on many external factors, like gut feeling, like intuition. There's a lot of creativity in sailing. But it also is a sport that requires data. And without analyzing our performance and looking at the data, we're in the dark. We can't have that intuition and that creative gut feel without being anchored by some of those data points. Impossible to optimize our environment unless we know where we're heading, and it's the data that gives us that opportunity. So of course, fast track to the recent America's Cup. It's only been 15 years since we had, crews of 20 plus pulling bits of string on a vessel. Now, all of those jobs have gone. Most of those jobs will, in the future, transition to different terminologies, different skill sets. And in fact, if we look at Prada in this particular image, we've got not a helmsman, we've got a pilot. We haven't got trimmers, we've got flight controllers. And actually, you can't quite see them, but there's 4 people on that boat that are actually on bicycles producing the power, all of which actually could be done by a battery. But they decided that they wanted it to be a human sport, and so they're riding bikes because it's more efficient to turn your legs than it is to wind winches. The other element to storytelling is how do we bring some of this technology to light for the public? And this particular America's Cup had the first data set where this is a bit of software that's been developed, which actually is real time showing the weather on the race course. You can see where the stronger winds are, where the gusts are. And they also had a remote pilot boat that would then simulate that course based on the data and the polars of the America's Cup boats, so that the public at large could kind of see what they were doing in real time, where they were headed, why their performance was gaining because they were in stronger winds. And this is just the start. It really is just the start of making sailing perhaps much more accessible to understand for the general public. You don't become an America's Cup sailor by spending hours and hours and hours on the water. In fact, track time on the water is quite limited. So how are they learning to pilot these boats? They're racing simulators. They're logging hours and hours in simulators. They can practice every maneuver. They can set up a competitive environment with fleet racing, with match racing, and they can practice all their maneuvers. Some of the visiting teams that came to Barcelona for the America's Cup, the sort of junior, had a youth and a women's America's Cup for the first time. They actually didn't sail these boats in real time before the Cup. They did all of their training in simulators. Can you imagine? Can you really imagine what that is like? That is a world that is, more like, let's go and find someone who can play video games than can sail. But of course, the winning ability still came down to the ability to measure or see a wind shift on the water, or to pick up a metaphorical current or shift in wave direction. Or those physical elements still made the difference. But these tools enable us to practice, produce a road book, and then continually get better and better and better through refinement, and also potentially a lot cheaper than building another boat to race against. I guess one of the big fears of this world is can we adapt? Can we, there's some people, and I'm one of those in the audience that probably don't want to really adapt. I actually quite like sailing this old wooden boat with my hands feeling sore because I've pulled the bits of string and trying to find ways in which to make it go better. But that world is long gone. I look at my kids who are at primary and secondary school now, and thinking, some of the things they're learning, I was learning 30 years ago. This is really outdated in the world that they're probably going to have a dozen or more different jobs. They're going to have to learn resilience. They're going to have to learn to adapt. There's some skill sets that actually we probably need to be imparting into our teams and our people that are very different from the things that we're learning in education. And here's an example of that. So I mentioned the cyclors. This was actually from the previous America's Cup, where Team New Zealand actually convinced everyone they were building a boat in the conventional way with winches, and then they turned up with these 4 cyclers riding bikes, and they absolutely destroyed the competition because they could produce more power. The more power they produced meant they could control the sails, the foils in the water, and they just had oodles more power than any other team, and that was really the reason why they won the cup. But it didn't all go that well for them, and this was during one of the races where they pitch-poled and capsized, significant damage to their wing, and all of a sudden the human elements of actually, how do we repair this boat? How do we get things back on track? Can we still compete? These critical elements really came to the fore. But the point of this is that those winning areas are in the margins, they're in the sidelines. It doesn't matter what sport you're taking part in, the performance opportunities come in those areas. And Team New Zealand have been a master at this. This is an image from the Southern Ocean on a stormy leg from Sydney to Cape Town. We left Sydney, and it was probably one of 7 or 8 major storms that were going to happen through the Southern Ocean. Bearing in mind we're going against the prevailing winds, so we're going head on into these storms. And brewing up in the Bay of, in the Tasman Ocean, there was a particular violent storm, and the New Zealand Met Office, were giving everyone a briefing that morning about this particular storm in the Bass Strait. It was going to be quite hard. And I can remember 11 of the other crews walking out of that briefing, and the sort of conversation on the dock was, it's going to be really difficult. I'm really worried about this storm. And I remember sitting down with my crew and said, don't worry about that storm. It's probably one of maybe 7 or 8 that we're going to experience on this leg. What's more dangerous is coming in behind that storm is an area of high pressure characterized by no wind, and the whole fleet are going to get parked up off Tasmania, sat looking at each other with no wind for probably the next 5 or 6 days. And if one boat manages to escape around the outside and get away, it might just be the end of that leg. And so our focus was not on the storm, it was actually on the calm. And we aggressively punched through this storm, got away from it, away from the high from Tasmania, and within 72 hours we were about 100 miles ahead, and that lead grew to a complete weather system ahead. And in an upwind race against the prevailing winds and currents, if you're a weather system ahead of your competition, there is no real opportunity for them to get back unless you suffer big breakage. We're hearing a lot about AI in the news at the moment, and perhaps one of the biggest things that people are concerned about is this adaptation to jobs. And I do love the conversation at the sort of the kitchen table with my kids, where my wife, who's a marine scientist, and believes that we should be teaching these sort of traditional skills. And I'm like, yeah, but they've got a phone in their pocket that can answer 90% of these questions. Let them loose with that. Let them loose with that tool. It's a bit like 30 years ago saying, you can't take a calculator into a maths exam. That's the world they're in. So we've got to think about what are the jobs, what are the skills, what are the things that we can impart that are irreplaceable. And yeah, I did quite like this picture because you think we'll be giving the difficult, boring jobs to the robots, but I think we'll still be the ones who are taking the bins out on Sunday night and doing the washing up. These robots aren't going to want our boring old jobs. But there's one thing that they can't do yet, and that is really show some of the human skills. And I think, when I look at this audience, when I look at the work that you're doing, some of it is absolutely going to be done autonomously by machines and so on. But the fundamental changes that John was highlighting, the importance of preserving our oceans and so on, those key critical things are going to be done by humans. We have to really come to the fore. Our ocean needs us now more than ever before. During the mutiny voyage, I started to do some work with Airbus around some of the traits that you need to impart in terms of building teams. And we coined this sort of sixth sense, this kind of human-centric leadership where gut feel and intuition were absolutely really key, perhaps the sorts of things that machines struggle with. And whilst I'm not going to go into the detail of what we developed, some of these key words I hope will resonate with many of you. A sense of presence. The moment you walk into a room like this, what is the feeling? What is the mood like? How do you engender a sense of excitement about the future? Belonging, actually, in this particular case, there was no sense of belonging because this crew were put together as a disparate group for Channel 4. But actually, a really important part of any journey is building that sense of belonging. Purpose, future, and of course you'll notice their performance, because actually we need these data driven performance focus to really get ourselves to the end, to deliver on the program, to ensure that we survive the ordeal. A couple of final points that I want to leave you with. When we hear about marine AI, we hear a lot about this word frictionless. We need to create frictionless systems. And about 4 weeks ago, we cut down a little set of Douglas firs on Holden Forest in Dartmoor to make a new mast for the boat, in fact, the boat that sat out in front of Knock. And I was there with the boat builder, and I said to him, why have you only put one pulley block on that system to pull this sail up? Why not have two, which would make it easier? And he turned around and said, Conrad, if I put 2 blocks on there, you won't know how hard to pull. The key thing about friction is it provides feedback. It provides heat. And most importantly, it provides some resistance, so we know how hard to push or pull. Frictionless systems, well, they're easy. Maybe boring. I mean, how many of you have gone home and had a conversation with your partners about frictionless environments? Normally it's under tension, isn't it? Or so, bear in mind that we do need a little bit of feedback in the system to make these things work. And that's, again, where our human skills and human intuition can really help. So I want to leave you with this final slide. We we set off around the world, sailed 33,000 miles. We were given a tool, a 72-foot yacht. It was a brand new yacht. There was a set of basic polars for that yacht. But we didn't have the data on how well to sail that boat for every given wind speed, direction, current, and so on. And so we data logged every 15 minutes for 33,000 miles around the world. Just manually, we didn't have, we just put it into a spreadsheet. That data, by about two-thirds of the way around the world, showed a really critical race-winning thing that we picked up, and we were the only team to pick up, and that was the sail crossover between our biggest sail and the next sail down, the number 1 to the number 2. And everyone thought, even the designer thought, that that sail crossover was 18 knots true wind. Actually, the way the boat had been designed is that it as soon as it heeled over with more power, it went sideways. And so actually that crossover happened 16 knots, not 18 knots. And we could prove through the data that we were actually sailing a better VMG, velocity made good, to our given track by reducing sail a little bit earlier. And as a result of that, it was one, not the only thing, but it was one of the factors that made a difference between us winning the race and not winning the race. And I think it just highlights for me the importance of great data will make a really fantastic difference to our intelligence, but we also still need that intuition, that gut feel, that sense of creativity that really does serve us as humans on this planet so well. So thank you very much.